Good morning. I'm speaking with Professor Seyyed Hossein Nasr, who is presently a professor of Islamic Studies at George Washington University, and he is one of the world's leading experts on Islamic science and spirituality. He completed his undergraduate degree in physics at MIT, his master's in geology and geophysics at Harvard, and his PhD in the history of science and learning also at Harvard. From 1958 until 1979, he was professor of the history of science and philosophy at Tehran University, and was also the founder and president of the Imperial Iranian Academy of Philosophy. Among his more than 30 books and 300 articles, Dr. Nasr has written the text Man and Nature, the Spiritual Crisis of Modern Man, Religion and the Order of Nature, and Knowledge and the Sacred. And he is particularly concerned with the philosophical and religious dimensions of the environmental crisis. Good morning, Dr. Nasr.
Good morning.
Now, my first question. In your 1968 book, The Encounter of Man and Nature, you write, "To be at peace with Earth, one must be at peace with heaven." Would you please explain this in light of the environmental crisis?
We begin with the name of God. We Muslims always begin things with His name. What I meant by this statement is that all human beings, everything they do, everything they think, is determined ultimately by their relationship or lack thereof with what I call heaven, with God, with the absolute, with divine reality. If we accept that divine reality, it affects our actions in one way. If we do not, then it affects our actions in other ways. I do not believe that it's possible to have peace in this world, whether it's with nature or among ourselves, without being inwardly at peace with ourselves. And it's impossible to be at peace with ourselves without being at peace with the divine reality which herself reflects. And therefore, ultimately, to be at peace with earth, one must be at peace with heaven, as I wrote in that book.
Right. So theology then should have a role to play in science?
This is a very important question, because as soon as you say the word science today in English, it is what the physicists in the 1950s call a sacred cow, as if it's a revealed body of knowledge, and nothing else has a right to interfere in it. Actually, science is a product of different societies. And Western science itself has gone through many different transformations, even after the 17th century scientific revolution. The secularization upon which science is based, that is the cutting of the hand of God from the study of the world, is itself one of the major problems for the environment. And therefore, there has to be a change within the paradigm of science itself to include other ways of studying nature, understanding other elements of nature, which were put aside completely with the 17th century scientific revolution and the idea that nature was pure quantity and a machine to be treated only mathematically. And in that sense, yes, in that sense, not only theology, but spirituality and philosophy have to play a role in enlarging the horizons of a science which now threatens our human existence.
So what then is Islamic science?
I used this term for the first time over half a century ago, and now everyone speaks about it. It is based on this very idea that I just mentioned for you, that is, every science is a product of a particular civilization. It is based upon certain premises that are related to the paradigm, to the worldview of that civilization. The idea that we have science is utter nonsense from the point of view of even many contemporary philosophers of science. Now, Islamic science is that science which was developed for centuries, about 800-900 years, as a sort of the most active form of science throughout the globe in Islamic civilization, and was and is closely related to the principles of Islam, for example, the idea of divine unity, interrelatedness of things, and so forth. And so Islamic civilization has had a long scientific tradition, much of which influenced the West very deeply, but was used in a different way by the West. And this Islamic tradition of science are called Islamic science.
Could you go into a bit more detail or explanation of how Islam would impact on scientific methodology or scientific knowledge, how an Islamic way of thought would impact on scientific approach?
Yes, this, of course, is a very complicated philosophical issue. One cannot go over it in a few moments.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, everybody talks about the scientific method. I do not believe that there's such a scientific method per se. Otherwise, Einstein discovered the theory of relativity. How would that fall under the scientific method? He looked at the classical equations as a young man and said there's something wrong with that. He didn't do any experimental work in the lab or anything like that. But the predominant method of modern science, which is to study things empirically and then to rationalize on the basis of empirical evidence, is a very particular form of epistemology, a very particular form of knowing. Islam does not deny such a possibility, but it does not limit human knowledge only to this way of knowing. And therefore, the horizons of Islamic epistemology are much wider. Secondly, for Islam, nothing can be studied independent of God. God is both the creator of the world and is a source of knowledge, both. And therefore, to claim that there is a domain in which human beings, independent of God, study the cosmos independent of God, and the question of God is irrelevant, really, whether you believe or not, whether you look at God or not, that's an individual matter, but does not concern the science per se. This is something which Islam and Islamic science have always rejected.
Mm-hmm. So, in Islam, then, is there a separation? There's not a separation then between humanity and the natural world, such that there's a natural law and a divine law, al-Sharia, one applied to the chaotic world of nature and the other applied to human society?
The idea of natural law really developed in the West, in the medieval West, under very special circumstances, especially by St. Thomas Aquinas. I do not want to go into that now, but I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Let's not get to the technical term natural law. Let's use the word laws of nature.
Sure, sure.
For Islam, all laws which we observe in nature, such as the apple tree giving apples or a rock falling down from a mountain, all that we call laws of nature are also created by God. And there is no absolute separation between the Sharia as the law of human society and the Sharia of nature. And that is why many Islamic thinkers have spoken about this, about the law of various creatures being the complements of the laws which we as human beings must observe.
So then, what can society learn from the order of nature?
We can learn everything that modern science is learning from the order of nature. Look at all that Islamic science developed in
Mm-hmm.
astronomy, in mathematics, in physics. Of course, now there's been more development, but the idea of being able to to gain knowledge from nature is not abrogated by integrating this knowledge into other orders of reality. I mean, let me take a specific case. For example, optics.
Mm-hmm.
All of the laws of optics, which in the 17th century led to the microscope and the telescope, and that in turn brought about the scientific revolution, almost all of them were discovered by Islamic physicists and mathematicians, like Ibn al-Haytham and so forth. However, that was not pitted against the understanding of light as something more than simply a quantitative phenomenon to be studied. And therefore, the Muslims were able to gain a great deal of knowledge of nature without the restrictions which a monopolistic science of nature places upon man's relationship with the divine.
Mm-hmm. So, how would you define the relationship of God to the order of nature according to the traditional Islamic view, and what are the implications then of this relationship in light of an environmental ethic?
Well, that's a very big order. First of all, as far as the relationship is concerned,
mm-hmm.
Islam believes that not only God is the creator of the world,
mm-hmm.
but also the sustainer of the world. That
mm-hmm.
right now, as you and I speak, if God would let the world go, the world would become nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So it does not accept an ontological independence of the world, that is, independence of the existence of the world from the source of all existence, which is God. Secondly, Islam believes that the way things act, the way things are, what we call the laws of nature, are not accidental, but they're part of the created nature of those things which in fact act accordingly. Supposing a crystal reflects light.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Muslims believe that this is a quality in crystals, which in a sense was created by God. Now, people might ask, well, what about the transformation that takes place in nature? This point of view does not negate the possibility of transformation because God acts through agents, not always directly. He can act directly, but sometimes he acts through agents. And secondly, what we call the development of things is already contained as a possibility within the thing as created by God. This is where there's a great difference between the Islamic point of view and modern evolutionism. For example, a seed can grow into an apple.
Mm-hmm.
All the possibilities of becoming an apple are already contained in the seed. And therefore, again, although God did not create an apple directly, but created the seed, or even before that, other things which became the seed, all the possibilities manifest in the natural world go back to God, and God has knowledge of all of them.
Right. Well, what about the idea of hierarchy and the kingship of God? Some ecofeminists like Sally McFaig argue that presents a concept of God which is distant and dominating, and therefore argue about God as mother, friend, lover, and say that, and argue against the idea of hierarchy and the monarchical understanding. How would you react then to that ecofeminist criticism?
I would react by saying that women can be just as hierarchical as men, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
You have many traditional families in Africa or India where the great-grandmother and the grandmother and the mother and the daughter are in the same relationship as the great-grandfather and so forth. I do not really think that this way of looking at things is very helpful. I believe that hierarchy is part and parcel of existence, whether you call it patriarchal or matriarchal or anything else. But there is everything we do in this life is based on a hierarchy. Yeah, every company, every army, every economic activity is based on a hierarchy. In mathematics, there are those who know more mathematics, there are those who know less. There's a hierarchy of mathematicians. And to be opposed to hierarchy is really to be opposed to the nature of things. However, hierarchy is complemented in all traditional teachings by intimacy, by the closeness of God. The Quran, which always speaks of the absolute transcendence of God, also says that God is closer to us than our jugular vein, that wherever we turn, there is the face of God. I'm quoting directly now from the Quran. So I know Professor Sally McFaig very well. She's a wonderful person and an important authority in ecofeminism. But I do not believe that feminism itself will solve our environmental crisis. As you see in countries where the feminine element is strong, they've never had strong patriarchy, as in India. Half of all the forests of the Amazon, of the Himalayas, have been destroyed during the last 30 years. So this is a kind of dream that women are gentle and kind and men are rude and hard, and therefore if people become more feminine, they would love nature more. I wish this were so, but this is not necessarily the case. This is a very, very complicated situation, and some mothers are nurturing, some are not. And to just be a mother doesn't mean that one becomes very much aware of taking care of nature. Mm-hmm. All human beings have that element in them. There are men farmers in traditional parts of the world who are as caring for the soil than any mother would be for the milk of her child. So I think that this responsibility put upon our shoulders to protect the environment transcends gender. And I think both the male and female sex have fallen from the performing their responsibility.
So in terms of, well, what about the idea of kingship and an immanent God? Do you find those reconcilable?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because in our own being, we have to start with ourselves. God is completely beyond us, transcendent. Mm-hmm. He's also completely within us. And all religions teach that. Hinduism in its own way, Christ said the kingdom of God is within you, mm-hmm. and it said also at the same time, our Father who art in heaven. And I gave you the example, no religion emphasizes as much transcendence of the divine as Islam and Judaism, these two religions. But at the same time, the Quran always speaks over and over again about the intimacy of God with us. There's a very famous verse of the Quran in which the Prophet is addressed by God, and God tells him, if my servants, that is my creatures, ask about me, tell them that I am near. There is no contradiction unless you look at it only from the point of view and either-or logic.
Right. Well, Dr. Nasr, thank you for joining us, and I appreciate your time.
You're quite welcome. I think the question of the environment and the deep roots of why we're having this crisis is the most important issue before all of us. And I hope that we do not become satisfied simply with the cosmetic responses. We need something much more profound than that.
Well, thanks again. I've been speaking with Professor Seyyed Hossein Nasr, who is the professor of Islamic Studies at George Washington University and one of the world's leading experts on Islamic science and spirituality.